Hello and welcome to my first ever video. They say your first one's going to suck no matter what you do. So I thought I might as well do it talking about something I love very much, which, spoiler alert, by my background, I do think Jurassic Park is timeless magic. But stick around. We're going to go over 5 themes that I think do give it that title of timeless magic, especially 3 decades on. It'll be 30 years in June or July of this year since it was first released, which is absolutely crazy. So without further ado, let's get into what makes it such a classic so many years on and so well respected by critics, filmmakers, and movie watchers like you and I. First up, we have our cast of characters, which I know might sound self-evident. They're iconic, they're magical. They brought them back for Jurassic World with this big, hoo-ha. But what I actually find really interesting is they're actually quite two-dimensional. There isn't a lot of depth to them. So what makes them so timeless despite that? And I think it's actually the genius of the author of the original book, that the movie's based on. His name is Michael Crichton, and I definitely recommend reading his books. But Crichton, rest in peace, he had a knack for taking these sort of stereotypical surface level characters and just giving them just enough background, just enough motivation in service of his plot, in service of those key themes and messages that he wanted to convey to us as the readers. And a lot of time, his plots revolved around things like man's hubris, going out of control, getting shattered, and it almost always had something to do with technology going out of hand. And so, because of that, he often put in these sort of complex technical and scientific concepts and views that probably didn't then have enough room for these complex characters alongside it. I mean, we're talking about slabs of text where, we're getting explained these advanced theories, technologies, etc. I can't believe I just said etc. on a YouTube video. Anyway, I'm such a nerd. I think it actually serves his novels better that the characters are at the surface layout because of that. And I think that's what makes us as an audience more invested in what's happening and what's going on, because we're not spending so much time on these sort of backstories and complex relationships between people. I think what also happens is we can project our own fears, insecurities, excitement, all these emotions onto these characters, which I think, if they were more complex, would be a little bit harder to do. So I'd love to explore what this means in Jurassic Park by looking at a few of those characters. I'm only going to go over 3 just because otherwise the video will just go into hours and hours. But if you do find this interesting, I'm more than happy to do a part 2, looking at more of the characters and what makes them tick and why they're relevant to the themes. Because really, I could talk about Jurassic Park forever. So let's get cracking with our first character, who I think, in my biased opinion and subjective opinion, is the most important character in the movie. Grant. Grant is our veteran paleontologist, and I think very much a romanticized, ideal version of what a field scientist is. We're even introduced to him on his beautiful dig site, and you can just tell he would be happy to spend the rest of his life out there digging up those lovely dinosaurs and writing books about them. But 3 things are made very clear about Grant from the outset. 1, he's not great with technology. 2, he's not great with kids. And we all saw the way he terrorized that poor child for daring to call velociraptors oversized turkeys.
Hey, Alan, if you wanted to scare the kid, you could have pulled a gun on him,
Yeah, no, kids.
And 3, he himself has so much fear and respect for these dinosaurs that came millions of years before us. He knows that anything we dig up and talk about really is just an assumption, and an unprovable one at that. So when he goes from that initial sense of wonder in the movie, it's clear that this is something he has imagined for so many years. And here they are right in front of him. And he might not have imagined them that way. Or maybe he did imagine them that way. But that whole excitement of imagination has now been taken away by seeing something real. And I think the scene that really speaks to me of this journey of him going from absolute awe to this sort of mournful disillusionment is after he's rescued the kids from the T-Rex rampage and they've run up the trees, which by the way was such a cool sort of full circle of reminding us of human apes of old running up into the trees to escape the dangers below. But once they're up in the trees, Grant promises to stay up all night so the kids can sleep in relative peace. And he takes out the fossilized raptor claw, the same one he terrorized that child with, and he looks at it in this sort of surreal disbelief. And in a split decision, he throws it away. And I know a lot of us were screaming at the screen, Grant, it's a weapon, keep it, you absolute idiot. But I do think it's a really nice scene that depicts what Malcolm had actually said to him earlier.
So what are you thinking?
We're out of a job. Don't you mean extinct?
And I think that's Grant's journey, facing into a dying field, a field that's about to go extinct. Gone is imagination. Here are the creatures. What is there left for him? Next up, we have our fan favorite Ian Malcolm. And with a shot like this from Spielberg, how could he not be? Which, by the way, certainly wasn't in the book. But Ian is our smug and critical mathematician slash chaotician, and he never lets us forget it. And really, he is the mouthpiece of the author in the book. There are these sort of long monologues where Ian is breaking down his chaos theory in the book. And let me tell you, I'm sure we can all relate to that sort of one-way monologuing of some people because there's very little exchange of ideas in those monologues. But I think it actually translates even better in the book because it's less in your face. Yeah, he has some nice monologues in the movie, but they're powerful and they're timed right. And I think it makes them even punchier. He's giving it not just us as the audience, but the characters around him challenges. He questions the world around him, and he's the first to question everything about Jurassic Park when everyone else is still in this state of naivety, wonder, or he's already looked at the situation, examined it, and gone, I don't need to know a thing about dinosaurs. I know chaos theory. Chaos theory tells me that this system is inherently unstable and there will be dangerous results. Unfortunately, because Ian is so smug, funny but smug, the other characters I think are put off by his approach and struggle to relate to him. So I don't think they bought into his message early on, even though there was really an underlying truth to it. And I think we can all reflect on this in our own lives, where there are some people who, have a really important message to share or an underlying truth, like we said before, but because of the way they convey themselves, it makes it so hard for us to actually accept what they're saying. So it becomes a hard pill to swallow.
Now, eventually, you do plan to have dinosaurs on your dinosaur tour, right? Hello? Hello? Yes?
I really hate that man.
And with Ian, he obviously is trying to make sure everyone is held to account. And the scene that really depicts him so well and shows how central he is to the theme of the movie is when they're all sitting around and Hammond is giving the presentation after they've seen the park, and Ian slaps his hand down on the table and calls Hammond out, calls out the lawyer for exploitation. And it's a really powerful scene because it talks about things that we as a society, as a modern society, need to consider.
Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Malcolm represents this message so well, and I think that's part of why people who watch Jurassic Park love him so much. He is our mouthpiece. He is our moral compass outlet. He gets to say the things that we as an audience are thinking.
You don't understand this Luddite attitude, especially from a scientist. I mean, how can we stand in the light of discovery and not act?
Oh, what's so great about discovery? It's a violent, penetrative act that scars what it explores, what you call discovery. I call it Natural world.
Speaking of corruption, we have Henry, our power corrupted scientist, and he really is drunk on his own creations. He believes the God fallacy that Hammond has spoon fed him all along. And in the book, there's this rich explanation of how Hammond brought Henry onto the project, and it showcases that evolution of their relationship, where they end up in this sort of deranged parent child sort of dynamic. Hammond promises him the world. He plucks him out of his early academic career and says, "No, Henry, that's the old way. Let me show you the new way. Follow me for prestige, for glory, for money. This is the future."
Norman always said you're the best geneticist in his lab. What are your plans now?
I don't know. Research.
You want a university appointment?
Yes.
That's a mistake. At least, if you respect your talent.
Why?
Because, let's face facts. Universities are no longer the intellectual centers of the country. The very idea is preposterous. Universities are the backwater. Don't look so surprised. I'm not saying anything you don't know. Since World War II, all the really important discoveries have come out of private laboratories. Universities simply aren't where it's happening anymore, and they haven't been for 40 years. I'm talking about work. Real accomplishment. What does a scientist need to work? He needs time, and he needs money. I'm talking about giving you a 5-year commitment and $10 million a year in funding. $50 million, and no one tells you how to spend it. You decide. Everyone else just gets out of your way.
And Henry really buys into this message. And it's really reminiscent of the world we live in now, where you've got these, huge companies or startup companies, and often they're sort of tech companies, and they promise society all these benefits. And sometimes you've got to ask, at the cost of what? Especially if it's a CEO with a ruthless vision that they want to fulfill. And often the employees get swept up in all of it because of that ruthless desire to achieve a very specific result. And it will come at the cost of anything. And Hammond is very much like that with Henry. Henry is his tool. Hammond cannot create the park without Henry. And Henry does create Hammond the park.
We've engineered them that way.
And in the book, Henry goes so far as to want to modify the dinosaurs to look more like what the visitors, us humans, want to see. And that's the whole premise of the Jurassic World franchise. And even though these scenes are not in the first movie, even through the small amounts of dialogue that Henry does get, especially in his confrontations with Malcolm.
Yeah, what, does somebody go out in the park and pull up the dinosaurs' skirts?
We control their chromosomes. It's really not that difficult. All vertebrate embryos are inherently female anyway. They just require an extra hormone given at the right developmental stage to make them male. We simply deny them that.
Deny them that?
You get to see the Henry that will come in Jurassic World. He is so arrogant in protesting against anything Malcolm says about the park because he really believes he's built this foolproof system. And through all these scenes, even what little we see in the first movie, it reminds us that Henry and Hammond don't really see the dinosaurs as anything more than consumable entertainment. Worse than a circus or a zoo, these dinosaurs are born to make Hammond and Henry money. They're born to give them scientific prestige, nothing more. Their DNA is going to be chopped and changed purely to entertain us and take our money. There is no respect left here for the rules of nature. So like I said earlier, if you want me to explore any of the other characters in more depth, I would love to. So drop a comment, tell me you want a part 2, and let me know some of the characters that you'd like to see get their own spotlight. Without further ado, let's continue. Anyone who's watched Jurassic Park certainly wasn't sitting there wondering, I wonder if this park thing is going to work out in the end. I wonder if old Grandpa Hammond was right. Are we humans and dinosaurs going to skip down memory lane holding hands? No, absolutely not. We were all in it for the shit show. We were waiting for the bloodbath to start. And I really respect Spielberg and Crichton for pretty much presenting that theme of the movie up front. We see the velociraptor being transported in this expensive machinery. We see the army of nervous humans trying to make quick work of it. But this single creature turns the whole scene into one of chaos and terror in seconds. And I think it really just beautifully lays it out for us. Shit's going to go down, it's going to get ugly, so strap in. And this never breaks the tension for us. They even introduce Nedry's involvement that he's going to be stealing embryos for a competitive firm quite early on in the movie. Again, this doesn't break the tension for us. It actually draws us in because we have enough understanding of what's loosely going to happen, but we don't know exactly how it's going to go down and the way that the characters are going to react and interact. And I think Malcolm being such a permanent reminder of this is wrong, things are going to get ugly, and having the other characters clash with that, it turns the earlier scenes into a kind of ticking time bomb. We're all sitting there on this, really fragile system going, when's it gonna break? Now, what do I mean by meaningful consequences and payoffs? Well, let's get an obvious one out of the way first. You've got Hammond, who brought his poor grandchildren to the most dangerous place on earth because he's under this delusion that it's ready, safe, secure for his target audience, which is children. So he brings his own grandchildren to prove this. And the park does not spare him. Those poor grandchildren are the first to be swept up in the carnage and probably the most traumatized out of all this experience because they're children. And then there's that wonderful scene where Ellie's sitting around with all that delicious ice cream that we were all, I'm sure, envious of as children. And she screams at him. She makes him confront the fact that he never had control. And though we doubt whether Hammond in this moment truly lets this message sink in, at least we as the audience get to feel that satisfaction of Ellie saying what we've been thinking all along.
Next time it'll be flawless.
It's still the flea circus. It's all an illusion.
When we have control again.
You never had control. That's the illusion. I was overwhelmed by the power of this place. But I made a mistake too. I didn't have enough respect for that power, and it's out now.
There's moments like this littered throughout the movie. We as the audience get gratification. We get to see all these thoughts, irritations, frustrations we have with certain characters or events get called out. There's also some not so obvious consequences that I personally appreciated. The first one that I think resonated really strongly with me is where the characters are on that automated tour through the park, where Hammond is really trying to show off. And you've got this recording in the cars that's kind of explaining what the dinosaur is, and then you're meant to look out, and it's meant to be like, here is that dinosaur. And there's this sort of build-up of tension and disappointment where our characters don't get to see those dinosaurs. And that I found really interesting because you've got these educated scientists expecting dinosaurs to come out on command from their cages, to come out and wow them. And we know that it's a sort of early naive excitement. The characters haven't let it sink in what's actually going on around them and how it's actually built on this questionable ethics and morals. But the park still does not spare them. It really punishes them for this arrogance, for expecting the dinosaurs to entertain them. And from here on, there's no escape from the horror. The illusion of security is shattered the moment the T-Rex breaks through the fence and the all-powerful systems are taken out. We see nature's equilibrium start to rebalance when predator and prey are finally brought together. Gone are those shiny creations in pristinely separated paddocks, like in that opening scene where everything is romanticized. Now we start to see the reality of these creatures as they clash for survival, for dominance in this alien world. Now, Grant and Ellie have no escape from the lack of respect they momentarily showed for these dinosaurs that they dedicated their careers to. Another of the not so obvious consequences is Ian Malcolm. We see from the outset how critical Ian is of the park, and it's kind of alluded to that he knew a little bit more than Grant and Sattler when he came into the park. It makes you wonder if Ian was already so insistent before he arrived to the park that it shouldn't go ahead, then why did he come along anyway? Why not just sit out in protest and let the lawyers know what he thinks of the park without ever stepping foot on the island? My personal belief is that he wanted to prove his chaos theory. It wasn't enough for him to be right. He wanted to watch Hammond's world burn, basically, so he could sit on top of that burning tower in the most smug Malcolm possible way and say, I told you so. But the park spared no expense with him, too. And I think he fell victim to his egotistical pursuit. He was the only one, in the movie at least, who had lasting and life threatening injuries. In the book, we're literally told he died of his injuries. But, I think the movie wanted to inject some Hollywood magic into the mix because who would get rid of this person? But the payoffs in general are really satisfying. You've got Dennis, who's the absolute menace, and he isn't killed by a T Rex. The movie doesn't give him that satisfaction. He's actually killed by a smaller creature called a Dilophosaurus. I think I said that right. And with much disgust from us as the audience, we see Nedry treat the Dilophosaurus as some kind of brainless zombie dog, where he even tries to play fetch with it at some point to distract it. And in this way, the park almost mocks Dennis's arrogance by the way that it kills him. And the extra touches of him losing his glasses and fumbling in the mud, it just adds to the payoff because we as the audience witness the park giving him what I guess our friends from America would say, humble pie. And I can go on forever with these consequences and payoffs, but I have theme 4 to move on to. I want to have a look at the humor, which is actually not sophisticated at all. And that's not to say that it's dumb or stupid. It's just simple enough to carry the horror and thrills through. I think it weaves in really nicely with the theme of the movie, where, it's the characters that get to release the tension at the right time, but without sacrificing on the horror that's unfolding all around them. And I think that's where modern movies actually go wrong. They sacrifice on the horror and suspense for some of these, quips, one liners, and jokes that don't really help to release the tension. All they do is just kind of pull you out of that scene. And I want to explain how Jurassic Park avoids this through a simple but important example. When that T Rex cuts through the electrified fence after the systems fail, we see that Gennaro and the kids are the first to experience its danger. As we know, our brave little lawyer dashes out into the outdoor toilet to rescue himself, and that's where we hear Malcolm say,
When you gotta go, you gotta go.
this small break in the thrills gives us temporary relief, but we're quickly thrown back into the horrifying chaos when the T-Rex unleashes its carnage on the kids and Gennaro. And while this is happening, the scene cuts back to Malcolm, who's sitting in the car with a fogged up windscreen blocking his view of the terror. And he comedically wipes it down to continue watching. Again, it's a comedic scene, but it's not extended and it doesn't get turned into the shared joke with Grant, which, by the way, I think a lot of modern movies would have made the mistake of doing. The scene instead returns to actions and thrills very quickly. We see Grant go into hero mode, he grabs the flare, he dashes out with it to try and give the kids enough time to run away, in complete contrast to the lawyer. Another great example is when Arnold is trying to break Nedry's code after they realize he's missing. They're trying to get the systems back online, and we see little funny moments where Arnold wipes down the desk and calls Nedry a slob, and then there's that very memorable line.
You didn't say the magic word. Please! God damn it! Hate this hacker crap.
But this humor is just a pinch of relief before we're pulled right back into the hopelessness and helplessness of the situation. Because we know without Nedry, the park will not come back online. To put it simply, the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park are their own characters. The T-Rex isn't this rampaging monster, it's an apex predator, and it's acting on its most basic instincts to hunt, to protect and expand its territories at all costs. And the velociraptors might seem malicious, and yes, they're terrifying, but in reality, they're just pack hunters. They've got strict matriarchal structures, and at least in the lore of the movie, they're super intelligent creatures and they're just trying to work out the world around them so they can gain their advantage. Even the Dilophosaurus is seen to study Nedry before killing him, like some predators do, picking on the weak and the vulnerable to maximize its chance of success. Each animal is given time to show its strengths in a memorable way. That's why the near kills and the kills are so deeply entrenched in our social psyche all these decades later. The T-Rex crashing the car down into the mud, literally tearing the lawyer apart, storming after the speeding car with Malcolm's legs dangling dangerously in the back seat. And what about the velociraptors? There's so many iconic scenes, like when they destroy that lamb in the foliage without us ever seeing them, or terrorizing and stalking and hunting those poor kids in that kitchen scene with that little retractable claw. And let's not forget how they attack the dinosaur in the visitors center. There is so much respect given to the animals in each scene. They are not just drones of CGI storming across the screen, trying to make as much bland carnage as possible. No, they're a story of their own. We feel the menace of them, but we're made to respect them and respect their actions because we're constantly reminded through the plot, through the characters, that they are just animals doing what they were born to do in a bygone era we know nothing about. One thing the book did that elevated this message in a way I really do wish the movie had kept, but I understand time was of the essence. In the book, you've got two young velociraptors, and they manage to get onto that last ship that leaves before the storm hits. Grant and the kids work this out early in the book, but they've already lost communication with the rest of the characters because they're stuck out in the paddocks with the systems offline. And this only increases their urgency to get communications back online so they could alert the captain before he docks on land. These escaped dinosaurs ultimately represent Malcolm's biggest warning and what Sattler later berates Hammond for.
If there's one thing the history of evolution has taught us, it's that life will not be contained. Life breaks free, it expands to new territories, and it crashes through barriers painfully, maybe even dangerously, but, well, there it is.
These animals making it onto the mainland outside of the park is the final nail on the coffin when it comes to the core theme. It cuts through Hammond's hubris and really just silences Henry's overconfidence, shining a light on the flea market that they'd created all along. We can see the wires. We can see the magician's act for what it is. It's nothing more than very expensive sleight of hand and trickery. There was never any control here, only blind arrogance and willful ignorance of what the park truly was. These five themes create a compelling set of characters and a consistent plot that I think drives home a single message. And by no means is this a new theme. It wasn't a new theme even when the movie came out. It was done so simply and with such a focus that it keeps you captivated all the way through, even though you have no doubt from the very first scene that chaos is about to erupt. So it's not the carnage that glues us to our seat. It's how the characters are going to respond to these horrors, what they will do to survive, and how they'll come to terms with the consequences of their decisions. This means confronting their own flaws and biases. The end of the movie can feel a bit like a fairy tale ending because of that unforgettable score. You know, they've escaped the park, they're smiling in exhausted relief on that helicopter, and Hammond's agreed not to continue with opening the park. Then the camera pans out and it shows us these pelicans flying over the sea. And it's a reminder of the real theme, which is Malcolm's repeated warning. Just as the birds are the final surviving branch of the dinosaur apocalypse all those millions of years ago, what will become of the animal survivors of Jurassic Park? Perhaps if the filmmakers had been a little bit bolder, they could have shown us a pterodactyl or another flying reptile rise up into the sky in a chilling reminder of the birds, triggering the score to return to its danger mode as the scene fades out, which I think would have set it up really nicely for Jurassic Park 2 and 3. But I guess, like the dinosaurs in our current timeline, the story is now history. Thank you so much for watching this far. And if you enjoyed it, you know the drill. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more of this. If you hated it, dislike, comment. Just know I will always appreciate any support you give me. And like I said, if you want me to do a part 2, I'm more than happy to do that. Just let me know. And also, these videos are only going to get better and better. So definitely subscribe if you want to see my journey on YouTube. But I hope you have an amazing day wherever you are in the world, and I will see you next time.